Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Novel. Today we're going to talk about Walker Percy's sixth and last novel, The Thanatos Syndrome. Thinking about this particular presentation, I thought I was going to begin by saying the Thanatos Syndrome can be looked at as a summary of the previous five novels, but that doesn't quite hit the nail on the head. I would say it's the culmination of what Percy has been saying in the earlier five novels. In other words, if we lose a sense of the self, if we get caught in the malaise, which Percy would describe as, we're adrift, we don't have any sense of who we are, we don't have a sense that we have received all these gifts from God, it will lead to the Thanatos Syndrome. So Percy often pointed out that in the 20th century, more people were killed than in the previous 19 centuries. So the Thanatos Syndrome is loss of self, a loss of sense of the sacredness of the self, and this novel, I think, is his sixth, and it's one of the best. I really like this. At the very beginning, before I say that, Percy not only wrote novels, he wrote essays, and in one essay he talks about the kind of novel that fascinates him. So I'm going to read this paragraph on Percy's view of serious novels. He says, a writer who has an explicit and ultimate concern with the nature of man and the nature of reality where man finds himself. Instead of constructing a plot and creating a cast of characters from a world familiar to everybody, he is more apt to set forth with a stranger in a strange land where the signposts are enigmatic, but which he sets out to explore nevertheless. One might apply to the novelist such adjectives as philosophical, metaphysical, prophetic, religious, in its true sense, as signifying a radical bond, as the writer sees it, which connects man with reality, or the failure of such a bond, and so confers meaning to his life, or to the absence of meaning, okay? That's exactly the kind of novel Walker Percy wrote 6 times. Sometimes people refer to Percy's novels as a novel of ideas. That's okay, but I wouldn't want that to frighten anybody. I've made a big point in talking about Percy that he's tremendously influenced by Kierkegaard, the first existentialist philosopher, 1813, 1855, and also by Gabriel Marcel, who died in the 20th century, very influenced. You don't have to know that to enjoy these novels, but knowing it adds something to it, okay? So the Thanatos Syndrome, what's going on? It's a first-person narrative, so it's kind of, I would say it's a kind of a philosophical or theological detective story. So right away, because it's in the first person, we identify with the main character, who is Thomas More, and who was a character in Love in the Ruins. So we're on the search also. What's going on? And here's what Moore says very early in the novel, okay? He hasn't been practicing medicine for about 2 years. And he says this. He says, have I been away so long and lived so strangely that everyone else seems strange? No, there's something wrong with these women. He's talking about 2 women that have his patients. 2 cases are too few even to suggest a syndrome, but I am struck by certain likenesses. In each, there has occurred a sloughing away of the old terrors, worries, rages, a shedding of guilt like last year's snakeskin, and in its place is a mild, fond vacancy, a species of unfocused animal food spirits. Then are they, my patients, not better rather than worse? The answer is unclear. They're not on medication. They are not hurting. They are not wearing the same old bone, but there is something missing. Not merely the old terrors, but a sense in each of her what? Herself? The main objective clue so far is language. Neither needs a context to talk or answer. They utter short, two-word sentences. They remind me of the chimp, Lana, who would happily answer any question, anytime, with a sign or two to get her banana. Both women will answer a question like, "Where's Chicago?" agreeably and instantly, and by consulting, so to speak, their own built-in computer readouts. You wouldn't. You'd want to know why I wanted to know. You'd want to relate the question to yourself. Okay, so what does Thomas More find out? He finds out the two villains in the novel are drugging people. They're poisoning the water, so they want to create a kind of a technocracy. And in terms of Percy's whole outlook, what they're trying to do away with is human freedom, which of course is a big theme for the existentialists and a big theme in all of Percy's writings. So the doctors are going to remove all problems because they're going to remove human freedom. I don't know how many of you watching this show have ever been part of a community that is totally ordered. The seminary I was in the 1950s, totally ordered. There was a rule for everything. You knew where you were supposed to be every minute of the day. So if you want an ordered society, that's the way to do it. A number of laws, a number of rules, everyone knows them and everyone conforms, okay? But is that the best way for people to grow? Is that the best way for people to develop? I think Walker Percy would say no. You've got to somehow challenge people's freedom. So as the novel develops, Thomas More becomes more and more aware that what's wrong, and he wants to try to find out what's going on. And he visits a priest, a Father Smith, who has kind of dropped out. He's living alone, and he's almost modeling himself on the saints, St. Simon Stylites, who walked out of society and supposedly lived up on a pole. He visits Father Smith, and he kind of interviews him. Okay, so he says to Father Smith, "Are you able to say Mass?" "Mass," he repeats, frowning mightily. "Yes." He says at last in his musing voice, "Oh yes." "Could you preach?" "Preach?" Again the cocked head, the sly near smile. No, why not? Why not? A good question, because it doesn't signify. What doesn't signify? The words. The words of the sermon, of the Mass, don't signify. That's well put, Tom, he says, not ironically, but the action does. Why don't the words signify? Let me ask you a question as a scientist and a student of human nature, he says, almost in his old priest, friend, colleague voice. Sure. Do you think it is possible that words could be deprived of their meaning? Deprived of their meaning? What words? Name it, any words. Tom, USA, God, Simon, prayer, sin, heaven, world. So Percy's view is this: things have become so secular that religious language doesn't communicate anymore. And a metaphor he likes is the religious language has been polished clean like poker chips. Several years ago, in a book called Reaping the Whirlwind, a theologian said this. His name is Langdon Gilkey. He said, when the preacher gets up on Sunday to preach, the congregation does not agree with him. The congregation does not disagree with him. The congregation doesn't have the slightest idea what he's talking about because religious language has been kind of watered down and they just don't know what he's saying. Then Gilkey makes this statement, which is really scary. He says, it's not just that. The preacher doesn't know what he's saying. Now, that may be an overstatement, but I think it's very important that we realize, and Percy made this point over and over and over again, that secularism has pervaded everything. That the truths of our faith are going to come to us through words. But if the words aren't signifying any longer, okay, if people don't hear them, don't get them, don't know what we're talking about, we're in big trouble. And that was, as I mentioned in an earlier talk, Percy was very interested in language because one of his daughter was deaf, and so he got very interested in trying to understand what language is. But he was also very interested, as Flannery O'Connor was, how do you write a religious novel in a secular age? And both Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy said, you're taking a terrific chance because even the critics may not understand what you are saying, okay? So the themes that Percy was preoccupied with, they're in this one. And this is what I just find so tremendous after all these years of reading him and writing about him and so on. Without being abstract, without being over-theoretical, he really is a philosopher theologian trying to probe as deeply as he possibly can into the mystery of person. But what's so wonderful is he's not doing it in a homily or in a sermon. He's not proselytizing. It's all a work of art. After Percy died, I wrote to his wife, and she wrote back to me, and she said, Walker always said, I have something to say, and I'm going to say it. And the thought occurred to me, is that dangerous? In other words, when you think I have a message and I want to communicate it, if I were writing a novel, the trouble would be it would sound like a homily or it would sound like a sermon. But the genius of Walker Percy, the talent of Walker Percy is he did all this in a story, and the stories are terrific. And the insights that he gets into these stories without preaching is just absolutely marvelous. It's almost like, those cartoons where you see a bulb going off when someone gets an idea. Well, that's the kind of thing that hits you when you catch what Percy is doing. Sometimes he does it humorously, but even the satire, okay, is to help us go more deeply into the mystery of person. So I like all 6 of Percy's novels, okay? Someone said to me once, Walker Percy wrote one novel 6 times. Not true. Not true. But Walker Percy was preoccupied with certain themes. The key one, the mystery of human person, that's quite true. And what I'm finding is rereading Percy is a sort of a special invitation to me to go more and more deeply into this great, great thing we call God's creation of a human person. So take any one of the 6 novels. I think you'll be stimulated. I think you may be inspired.